actually have two questions that sort of segue in because I used to live in the US and I often thought to myself, like, what would rock bottom look like for the US? I mean, sorry, like in order to want to change, like you're saying, how do these
Mhm.
cracks in the bubbles appear? Like how do they actually, and now it just seems like we're in a place where they would be appearing and that people might be aware that, they're not necessarily the best country in the world. So one, do you think that that's true, that there is sort of that sort of awareness sort of seeping through? And the other thing
Mhm.
is like, how do we actually inform these people more and maybe push them over the ledge a little bit, like onto our side? That was a terrible metaphor, but yeah.
Well, I think I know what you mean, but we're starting to see the cracks with the protests against U.S. policy towards Israel and U.S. support of Israel's genocide and war crimes. And by the way, the terms genocide and war crimes are defined. It's not a matter of opinion. Genocide, there's a UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, I believe from 1948, which defines genocide broadly as an intent to harm a group of people, a racial, ethnic, or national group. And then it gives example of what kind that harm can be. The harm doesn't have to just be killing. It can be violence. It can be mental harm. And war crimes, the Fourth Geneva Convention's Article 33 says, for example, collective punishment is by definition a war crime. So when Israel says they have to kill thousands of people to fight Hamas, they are in fact confessing to war crime. And this is something that cannot be hidden from the people. And these massive protests we've seen against Israel are an indication of a crack that you refer to in the system, but they quickly try to plaster over the crack and to subjugate the people who are speaking out. So you see people being silenced. In this particular case, they silence people by labeling any criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. So if you question our money going to kill people if you don't want to kill them, or the fact that the Israel lobby is such a powerful political force, Congress, in fact, and this was bipartisan, they invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to speak before Congress. So we see when the crack can appear, but they quickly, if they can't do anything else, they just use brute force to silence everyone. Anyone who makes, even asking a question about Israel or US policy about Israel, people are shunned and they are disappeared from public life. So we had a member of Congress who was censured. It's like it's an official condemnation of a member of Congress because she used the term from the river to the sea. Rashida Tlaib. And now we're told that this phrase is inherently anti-Semitic. People are losing jobs, being expelled from school. We saw college campuses, which is, not a surprise, become a center of protest, but these were crushed by the police. Here in New York, where I live, at Columbia University and the City University system, in California, at the University of California, Los Angeles, we saw the police working with a mob, a Zionist mob, to physically attack protesters, to be told Jewish students weren't allowed to go into their classrooms. It was propaganda, lies, brute force, people being denied opportunities or losing their jobs. So yes, we see the cracks, but we see the response to when the cracks start to appear. It's the way the US treats the rest of the world, that the US has to dominate. So this narrative has to dominate. And any sign that indicates the lack of legitimacy, the legitimacy that the state has lost in this instance and in others, has to be smashed. So that's what we see when the cracks are there. I think one of the reasons is it could spread. People might question this, then who knows? They could start questioning other things. This need to demonize the people who are speaking up. And we're told, for example, at Columbia University here, these are elitist kids and no one should listen to them. But the interesting thing to me is, first of all, it's not true of every student there, but even if it is, let's say you're in the quote unquote elite in one country, you still identify with people in a faraway country who are suffering. That's commendable. Isn't that commendable for people to make a connection with humanity in some other place? But they don't want that. They don't want you to feel connected to other people. So if you feel connected to Palestine, you might feel connected with the unhoused. You might feel connected with people in the mass incarceration system. You might feel connected to the unemployed. So I believe it's not just because of the power of the Israel lobby. They want to crush dissent. They want to make sure that people shut up and go along. And anything that puts the system in crisis, they see as a danger. And that's why it's attacked.
So what would you recommend that people listen, watch, or, to sort of get to strengthen that awareness?
Well, I will, toot my own horn and say read blackagendareport.com. We have a new issue every Wednesday, and a couple days later, we have our podcast, Black Agenda Radio. But Black Alliance for Peace we're an anti-imperialist organization. It's a membership organization. People who are not of African ancestry, there's a solidarity network. There's also good journalism. Consortium News is a good news source. I'm on all social media, Twitter and Facebook. So the International Manifesto Group is a good source of information. Orinoco Tribune, MR Online, Africa Stream is a great online resource. So I think once you start looking for these, you'll, the way the internet works now, you'll find the others. Electronic Intifada, if you want to know about Palestine, Pan African Newswire, they encyclopedic knowledge about the African continent. And we follow all of these sources on Black Agenda Report. But for as long as we can, social media is problematic because they can censor you. You can find out information, but then they can censor you, or, you can be shadow banned. And these things can and do happen. They've happened to people who I know, who I work with. But I say we use these platforms for as long as we can. Facebook actually is fairly useless. I can post my own interviews or something, but as far as sharing information politically, I mean, it works with the Atlantic Council. I mean, they tell you so. The Atlantic Council is NATO, by the way. Twitter, you have a better chance. Black Power Media on YouTube. How could I forget? Use the platforms as much as you can. I love Jeffrey Sachs. I can't remember the name of his YouTube channel. Jeffrey Sachs of fans. He's a Columbia professor, a person who had access to the very top of the political class, who's now politically, he's sounding the alarm about the dangers these people present. He's endorsed Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for president. So he's a good person to watch on YouTube. So those are just off the top of my head some of the sources that folks can look at, but we have to use these platforms as much as we can, familiarize ourselves as much as we can so that we can be knowledgeable. And when they tell you the Biden administration says Israel has a peace plan, and then you're like, no, they don't. And even the Israelis say, well, no, we haven't signed on to this plan. The goal is to shut you up. So let's just make up things to fill in those holes in the cracks that we were just talking about. But those are some of the places where you can get good information.